Hi there, I'm Sarah with the Hobby Lobby Creative Studio. Are you looking for a way to step up your jewelry designs? Try adding resin. Resin is an easy way to add depth, shine, and lots of interest to your handmade jewelry pieces. Stick around, I'll go over the basics of using resin right after this. Resin is a simple way to add that wow factor to your jewelry projects. Today I'll show you the steps you'll need to start using resin by showing you how to make these 3 beautiful pendants. But no matter what project you're working on, you'll need to start by prepping your workspace and mixing your resin. So here's what you'll need for that. 1 package of ice resin, measuring cups and stir sticks, paper towels, scissors, a straight pin, and a craft mat to protect your table. Here are several quick tips to keep in mind whenever you're prepping your resin. 1. It's a good idea to make sure you're working on a perfectly level surface. A level table is crucial to get a good dome without overflowing your bezel. 2. You should always mix at least 10 milliliters of resin at a time in order for the parts to mix and the chemistry to work. 3. Mixed resin cannot be saved to use at a later time, so be sure to mix only as much as you need for the project you're working on. 4. You'll have about 30 to 40 minutes of working time before the resin begins to harden. If you feel the resin begin to heat up, it's time to throw it away and start with a fresh batch. 5. If your project materials need any prep that involves drying time, like paper or photos being sealed, do that before mixing your resin. Also, remove any jump rings or attachments that may keep your bezel from lying flat. And 6. It takes a full 8 to 12 hours for resin to cure. Once it's cured, it will be solid, glossy, and ready to wear. This new ice resin comes in this handy pre-measured plunger. It's great because it measures out equal amounts of both the hardener and the resin at the same time. No more detailed measuring required. The first thing to do is to pop out the cap from between the handle of the plunger and cut the tips off of the 2 nozzles. Now, hold the plunger upright and allow the air bubbles to rise toward the handle. Carefully squeeze the plunger handle down, dispensing the resin into your measuring cup. Next, using a stir stick, very gently mix the resin for at least 1 full minute. You'll want to use a gentle folding motion, not a fast whipping motion. This keeps the air bubbles to a minimum. As you fold and mix, be sure to scrape the sides and the bottom of the cup. If you look closely, you'll be able to see swirls where these 2 parts are mixing together. Keep mixing until these swirls are gone and the mixture is clear. 1 to 2 minutes of continuous mixing should do it. Now that you've got your resin all mixed, set it aside for about 5 minutes. This allows time for the air bubbles to travel up to the top of the mixture and pop. You can also gently blow on the mixture to pop the bubbles, or you can simply pop them with a pin. Now that you're armed with all those tips and tricks, it's time for some projects. So let's start with this cool arrow pendant. In addition to your prepped resin, here's what you'll need to make it. 1 large diamond-shaped bezel, 3 metal arrows, purple glass glitter, a spoon, and a second mixing cup. Begin by preparing your resin, then pour half the resin into the other cup. Add about a teaspoon of glitter directly to one of the cups and mix it all together. Now, use your stir stick to scoop and drip the glittered resin into the bezel. filling it about halfway. Make sure the glitter is getting all the way into the corners. Continue to add glittered resin, slowly now, allowing it to settle after each scoop. You don't want to overfill the bezel. When the bezel is almost filled to the rim, place the 3 arrows on top of the bezel. If the arrows don't quite touch the resin, carefully use the stir stick to push the resin so it rises and touches the arrows. If that doesn't work, add some of the non-glittered resin, little by little, until you can get it to just barely touch the arrows. Be careful not to overflow the bezel. Let it all dry, and you're done. Now let's work on this cute doodle and flower pendant. In addition to your prepared resin, here's what you'll need for this one. A 1.5-inch circle bezel, patterned paper, a pen, scissors, paper sealer, a paintbrush, and 3 metal flower charms. When using paper in your project like this one, you have a couple of options. Sealing the paper first before applying your resin keeps the original color and opaque look of your paper. Applying resin without sealing your paper causes the resin to soak into the paper, making it appear more translucent. So I'm going to seal my paper for our project today. But first, I need to cut my paper to fit my bezel. So here are a few options of how you can do that. You can use the template that is printed on the inside of the packaging for the bezel. You can trace around the bezel. You can use an ink pad to use the bezel as a stamp. Or, in this case, you can use a 1.5-inch circle craft punch. Use a brush to apply a thin coat of paper sealer to the inside of the bezel. Also brush sealer on the back side of the paper. Then press the paper into the bezel. Be sure to press it in good, squeezing out any trapped sealer and really smoothing the paper. Brush a bit more sealer on the top. Make sure you're brushing around the edges of the paper and bezel too. After it's dry, I always add a second coat just to be on the safe side. Let this dry completely before moving on. Now add a thin layer of resin over the top of the paper. With the jump rings removed from the 3 roses, place them inside of the bezel. I positioned them so that the holes from the jump rings are hidden. Slowly add more resin into the bezel. Be sure to drip some directly on top of the roses, letting it run down between the petals. If you notice air bubbles getting caught around the roses, use a pin to pop them. To get a domed look, very carefully fill your bezel until a slight dome forms. Watch from the side as you add so you can see when it begins to dome. Don't overdo it though. Keep an eye on the very edges of the bezel. You can tell when the resin is getting close to pouring over. That's when you need to stop. It's best not to move a piece that's been domed. Just let it sit and dry. The slightest movement could cause the dome to fall and pour over the edges. Now you could also use this same technique by adding a photo in your bezel. Just be sure to thoroughly seal the photo before adding any resin. So let's move on to our last project, this eye-catching peacock pendant. So besides your prepared resin, here are the rest of the supplies that you'll need to make it. An ornate rectangle bezel, pearlized mica fragments, fresh green and champagne glass glitter, a peacock feather, scissors, paper sealer, and a paintbrush. This is a great example of how you can use not-so-ordinary objects like feathers for your resin designs. Begin by cutting down your peacock feather to a mini size that will fit inside the bezel. Paint paper sealer onto the feather, forming it into a longer, skinnier shape, and let it dry. Prep your resin and start by pouring a small amount into the bottom of the bezel. Sprinkle the mica fragments and the 2 colors of glitter into the bezel. Use a straight pen to scoot the glitter around if you need to. Make sure none of the mica fragments are coming out over the edge of the bezel. Now add a little drop of resin to the center of the bezel and place the peacock feather on top. Slowly drip more resin into the bezel, filling it to the top. Use a pin to push down on the feather or mica fragments if they try to rise to the top. Continue adding resin to create a slight dome. Again, watch from the side and keep an eye on the edges of the bezel. Leave it to dry and you're all done. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to resin. Play around. Try mixing in paints, seeds, or other small objects to create different textures and effects. Create depth by adding things in layers, allowing everything to dry in between each layer. Or use it as a glue to create an extra strong bond. Let your creativity loose to see what you can come up with. Well, that's all for today, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.